Maryland has one of the best wide receiver units in the Big Ten.
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, video content creator for 247 Sports and InsideMarylandSports.com, and host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. I hope everyone's having a good Wednesday on a hump day, getting through the week, just getting to the weekend. But I hope everyone is having a good day, whether you're watching this later on in the day, in the evening, or in the morning. Thank you for making Locked On part of your day and Locked On Terps part of your day. And I'm excited for today's episode. So let's get into it. I personally think that Maryland has one of the best wide receiver units in the entire Big Ten, and you could even put them up there in the country. That's how much confidence I have in Maryland's wide receiver room overall. I think when you think of wide receiver units, I don't know if you think of Maryland, especially even in the Big Ten specifically. I don't know if the guys that are just kind of not casual fans, but just your kind of normal football fans that watch a good amount, but Maryland doesn't come to their mind probably for one of the better wide receiver units in the Big Ten. And that's no blame of what Maryland has done, or it's not like they're wrong, because you hear about all these different players from all these other different schools. You probably would think of Alabama with all their different players that they have in the NFL, whether it's Jerry Jeudy or Calvin Ridley or Julio Jones, whenever you think of those type of schools, and of course you think of the LSU's, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and then of course you also think of the Big Ten schools that have produced really good wide receivers. Of course, Ohio State comes right to mind with Marvin Harrison coming out this year, and then Garrett Wilson, and that's just a couple. They have a ton of guys. Chris Olave. You think of those type of schools. You think of the Bamas. You think of the LSUs. You think of the Ohio States. You think of the Blue Bloods when it comes down to producing top wide receiver talent and having a really good wide receiver core year in and year out. But I'm here to tell you that Maryland, of course, isn't on that level. We don't have 10 all-pros in the NFL at the receiver position, or arguably the two best receivers in the game of football like LSU has. That's not what I'm saying. Don't get me wrong. We have Stephon Diggs. We have DJ Moore. We have some really good players in the NFL. But my point is, right now in the Big Ten, Maryland has one of the best wide receiver units in the country, in terms of returning guys, in terms of guys that you don't know about, and some guys that are going to surprise you for going into next season. But we have two guys in particular that I think both have a chance to be, whether it's third team All Big Ten, second team All Big Ten, first team All Big Ten. I think both of these guys have the talent to be All Big Ten type of players going into next year and going into the spring and seeing what they can do. Obviously, you don't accomplish all Big Ten in the spring. It happens in the fall. But don't get me wrong, though. You accomplish that goal in the fall during the football season, but it starts in the spring with the work that you put in and learning how to best utilize these guys. But we already should have a pretty good idea of how to utilize these two players, because we had them last year on our team and they made plays for us, and they're guys that a lot of the country really doesn't know about. When you think about returning receivers in the Big Ten, these names probably don't come up right away for you. But when I tell you about the statistics overall in terms of the returners in the Big Ten and what they did last year in the Big Ten, they really are one of the best groups in the Big Ten, in my opinion. Let me know if I'm wrong. I know a lot of people are going to be like, Ohio State, they have Emeka Mbuka coming back, and they have the number one recruit and whatever. They have all those type of different players, and Carnell Tate or whatever was a top recruit, and he's next up as well. A lot of people are going to hit you with that. But I'm not saying Maryland has the best unit. I'm not saying that. I'm saying Maryland has one of the best units. But let's talk about these two returners that Maryland fans, I'm sure you guys already know who I'm talking about. But Caden Prather and Ty Felton have a chance to, I think, do some really big things this year for the Maryland Terrapins. But there's one caveat to them having a big year before I get into what they did last year and the reason why I think they can have big years is the quarterback play is going to be pretty pivotal, as you guys know, in terms of we don't have Talia anymore. We might not pass the ball as much anymore. I'm not going to lie to you. A big reason why these guys were so successful is because of how much we threw the ball. We led the Big Ten in attempts. But I don't think that's really why. But I do think that's a small reason why. But I don't think that's the biggest reason why. I do think they're really talented. But, of course, Maryland's going to be starting a new quarterback. Talia is off to the NFL. We'll see what happens with that, if he gets drafted or whatever. But whether it's MJ Morris, Billy Edwards, Cameron Edge, you're going to want to get these two guys the ball, Caden Prather and Ty Felton. They're the strength of our team. And if the quarterback play is comparable and at least pretty good quarterback play, which you kind of expect, I would think, when you think about MJ Morris, who's probably a lot of people think is going to be the starter, and Cameron Edge can also sling it around. So you got those two guys are players that have a pretty good chance of one of them being the quarterback. If it's Billy Edwards, it might turn out different, but I do think it'll be between MJ Morris and Cameron Edge, but that's just me. But Ty Felton, I really think, I don't know if people know how good Ty Felton is. Like, this man is really talented. I think he's an NFL guy, and I think he's really good at the position, and I don't even think he's got it completely figured out yet. They talk about him in different clips of him being the fastest on the team. They were like, you guys know with the new college football game and all that's coming out, they're like, he should have the highest speed on the Maryland team is what he was saying. But I know I've talked to a couple of the players who say, watch out for me. Like, Ty Felton doesn't know how much speed that I have or the Maryland or anyone in the Maryland program. A couple of freshmen said that. But I do think Ty Felton's the fastest on the team, and he's an explosive type of player. But he's also got some size to him. He's like 6'1", so he's got that kind of perfect build where he's 6'1", can catch the ball, can move, and his route running is also there, and that's continuing to get better, and I'm sure it has gotten better. And last year was the first year we've seen him have a big role in the offense. And if you look at the stats, last year he was 7th in receiving yards in the Big Ten. 7th. That's pretty high level for a receiver in the Big Ten. 7th in receiving yards with 48 receptions and 723 yards. So he's already one of the top returning guys in the Big Ten, and I really think he has a chance to, okay, last year he broke out to Maryland fans, but he's a chance to break out in the rest of the country, and he's a big part of the reason why I say he's one of the best returning guys in the Big Ten and also in college football, probably one of the most underrated players, but he's also a big reason why I think Maryland has one of the top units in the Big Ten. And then you move on to Caden Prather, who transferred from West Virginia a couple of years ago now to come to Maryland, and last year was his first year at Maryland, but he was 12th in receiving yards last year in the Big Ten. So we're bringing back two guys that were top 12 last year in receiving yards. Not in terms of returning guys in receiving yards. They were top 12 last year in the Big Ten in receiving yards. And there's some really good players in the Big Ten. And Caden Prather was 12th in receiving yards, like I said, with 42 receptions and 666 yards overall. He's 6'4". He's a big threat. Both of them were red zone threats. Ty Felton they can both be absolute game changers in the deep ball because of Ty Felton's speed and then Caden Prather's height. I think they complement each other really well. And being top 12 in the Big Ten last year was not a joke. There's plenty of guys in that mix that were really good players like Roman Wilson and Marvin Harrison. Both of those guys are gone now, and there's other guys in that top 12 that are gone now, and you look at it, and Maryland has two of the top 6 returners in Big Ten receiving yards. So that is a pretty good spot to be. Two of the top 6 in Big Ten in receiving yards at the receiver position. I think we're bringing in I think that we have a couple really good guys on the outside, and Caden Prather and Ty Felton. I think Ty Felton can also move inside. And then I think there's also a couple of guys that people don't know about, like Ty Felton last year. I don't think Maryland fans knew about him, but the rest of the country didn't know about him, and Big Ten teams didn't know about him. And I'm not saying it's completely there, but if you played Ty Felton this year, you had a pretty good chance of going against him and being like, dang, he's a pretty good player. Where did he come from? But I think there's a couple of guys in that room that people don't know about that have a chance to be a star. Octavian Smith is one who could operate the slot next year. He might be faster than Ty Felton. And then you also have guys like Ryan Manning, who was a freshman last year, Shalik Knotts. It looks like it's an ongoing type of rotation of Maryland. Just keep on turning out these good players. So when you have 2 of the top 6 returners at the receiver position, you got a couple of guys that people don't know about. It's going to be hard to game plan around. I think it leads us to having one of the best wide receiver units in the entire Big Ten. Let's talk about the top 5 worst games this year of Maryland basketball. I will go through the worst performances this year, in my opinion, of Maryland basketball after this ad from Bettor Together. Tired of the same old daily fantasy grind where you make a roster, cross your fingers, and hope for the best, or losing on the last pick of an entry? Introducing Bettor Together, the first cooperative daily fantasy platform where teamwork trumps talent and you can play with your friends, not against them. Pick more or less on real-time player stats, strategize with your partner to boost your odds, and climb the leaderboard together. Bettor Together is the first cooperative daily fantasy application. Bettor Together offers a familiar experience for existing daily fantasy players with a social twist. You can play with a friend/teammate and provide a sense of enhancement, and the social experiment of watching sports makes you realize that daily fantasy sports is fun alone, but a lot funner together, and it's better when you're doing it with your friends. So download Bettor Together now at the App Store and sign up using promo code LOCKEDON for a chance to share all of your $1,000 in cash prizes. Remember, use the code Locked On because winning alone is fun, but it's better together. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy and is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. What were the top 5 worst games of Maryland basketball season? Yesterday, I ranked my top 5 best moments of Maryland basketball seasons, but let's be frank about how the season went. It was one of the worst seasons I've seen in a while from Maryland basketball, so we can't all be positive, even though I wanted to be positive yesterday, but we move on to today, and I'm ranking my top 5 worst losses that the Maryland basketball team had this year. And don't get me wrong, they were a ton to choose from. There are plenty of bad losses from Maryland basketball this year. But let's start at number 5, starting with us getting completely just destroyed by Penn State at the end of the year. This was the last regular season of the guys like Jameer Young and Dante Scott, and could be the last regular season of a lot of guys as Maryland Terrapins, whether it's Julian Reese potentially could leave, and Caleb Swan Rogers and Noah Batchelor are already gone. But in our last regular season game against a Penn State team that is not that good. Maryland got absolutely dominated, losing 85-69 to a team I just didn't think was that special. I didn't think was very good overall. That was definitely one of the worst losses. We couldn't really score. We also couldn't stop them. And like I said, Penn State basketball just wasn't good this year. So losing by that much was not pretty. Julian Reese was out. We were kind of saving him, I guess, for the Big Ten tournament, and he tweaked his ankle at practice. But still, it's just a pathetic kind of loss to end your season on. It just ended your season on a horrible note overall. My number 4 worst loss is right next to the Penn State game. It was a game right before the Penn State game, losing to Indiana. That was one of the worst losses for sure of the season. Not in terms of the scoreboard. We ended up losing by like 5. That's not why I really looked at it as a horrible loss. Number one reason why it was a bad reason. There's really 2 big reasons why. Number 1 was it was senior day. And senior day, you want to win for your guys. You want to win for Jameer Young. You want to win for Dante Scott and Jahari Long. You want to win for those players that have given a lot to this program, especially Jameer Young and Dante Scott. They've given a lot to this program. They've gone hard, and you want to win those type of games. And I know they're part of the reason we lost overall. They're on the team. But losing on senior day like that just wasn't a good look. And then my number 2 reason was we blew like a 14-point lead. We were up by 14 points in the second half and absolutely blew it at home as well. So it was a horrible loss because we blew a big lead. We lost at home. And then the biggest reason why it was senior day. Overall, that definitely was one of the worst losses in terms of situation and everything that was going on that day. There was worse losses in terms of the scoreboard, but losing a game like that to Indiana was not pretty at all for the Terps. Now going to number 3, I kind of have a combined little 2-game stint, losing to UAB and then backing that up with a loss to Davidson. I don't want anyone to trip. UAB is actually a pretty good team this year. They're in the tournament, and they're not bad at all. Maybe you could argue that they're better than us. I bet if we played a game, Maryland would be favored. But they're not a horrible team, but at the time, it really just hurt the momentum of our season. We couldn't really get going, and the Terps lost 63-66, only by 3 points after just another abysmal offensive performance on the year. And then we followed that up with a loss to Davidson, and it was like, dang, we just can't get anything going right now. We lost to Davidson, we lost to UAB back-to-back, and it was like, I think our confidence really went down right there when we hit those 2 losses. And Davidson's pretty horrible this year, and both losses were by 3 points. So losing to UAB and Davidson really made it look like, what are we doing this season? Do we have anything? Losing one to UAB was one thing, but losing both of those in that little tournament that we were playing in, it was just like, you cannot go 0-2 if you want really a shot at March Madness. I mean, sure, we had other opportunities down the line to win games, but you can't lose those 2 games overall, and it hurt kind of the look out for the season. My number 2 worst loss of the season was the loss to Villanova, one of the worst offensive performances of the entire year for Maryland, and that's saying something because we had plenty of terrible offensive performances, but the Maryland offense was just bad as you could possibly get. Villanova only scored 57 points, and we weren't in the game. I don't know if anybody watched that UVA game last night with how UVA played and how they couldn't score on Colorado State, but the Maryland offense might have been worse. We had like 15 points in the first half, and we scored I think it was 40 points overall. So not to be in the game where Villanova only scored 57 is just a bad look. And then the worst loss of the season, I think a lot of people would agree on this. I'm sure people have different top 5s. But the loss to Wisconsin in our final game of the year in the Big 10 tournament, 56-87. I expected us to lose that game, but I didn't expect for Wisconsin to mop the floor with us. They absolutely did what they wanted. A little bit was unlucky just because it seemed like they were hitting every shot. And if you look at the percentages, they kind of were. But that was definitely one of the worst performances I have personally seen from Maryland basketball. Should Maryland have accepted their NIT invitation? I will tell you about that after this ad from Nissan. This week's March Madness bracket is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. The Yukon Huskies can only be described as an Armada. The top-seeded team is as hardcore as it gets out there, so it's no wonder they've landed the top overall seed in the NCAA tournament. They're one of the favorites to win it all, despite 4 of the 6 Power 6 conference champions standing in their way in the East region. The Auburn Tigers can only be described as a Pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch and have really created a lane for themselves after claiming the top spot in the SEC as they knocked off the Florida Gators in the SEC tournament champion, and they're set to make a run in the NCAA tournament. The Oregon Ducks are obviously this week's Nissan Rogue. The team absolutely surprised us all with a powerful performance in the final Pac-12 performance, punching their ticket to the big dance. They say win life, go Rogue, and that's exactly what the Ducks have done here. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Maryland made the right decision not accepting the NIT invitation. I thought it made sense for the program. There is actually a really interesting kind of thing that came out about one guy. I'm not familiar with who he is. I would have to look back. But one guy basically just kind of ripping all the teams that didn't accept the NIT invitation. And he had a lot of really good points. I was kind of unsure a little bit how I stood on this. He made some really good points. Don't get me wrong. He basically said this might be the only chance for a lot of players to play in postseason play ever in their life in college basketball. And I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And he kind of made different similar arguments to that, and that people should want to play in basketball games. This is what they're supposed to love to do. And it just made kind of sense, his points that he was making. And he had an absolute point. And I have no reason to argue really against what he said, but I'm arguing against what he said. I think you can really have a different opinion on this, and I would respect what anyone has to say about this. But it's kind of like he made it sound like the opt-out in college football bowl games. It kind of had that same theme. It's not the exact same argument because the college basketball one is more about the teams not accepting it, and the college football one is more about the players opting out because, of course, all college football teams that can go to bowl games will play in bowl games and want to play in bowl games. So it's a little bit different of an argument, but it still has the same type of feeling to it about teams and players not wanting to play. And I don't know, this isn't me. I don't want to have an opinion right now about the opt-outs in college football because I don't know my stance exactly on that, but I do have a stance on specifically Maryland not accepting the NIT invite, but really overall all teams not accepting NIT invites. But there's plenty of teams that did. They still have the tournament going on right now, and yesterday was the first round of games. But I thought it made a lot of sense for Maryland not to accept the invite. I didn't think it made a lot of sense for Maryland to play in the NIT. I mean, for one, I don't think we deserve to be in a postseason tournament play after a pathetic season. We stunk this season. I don't know why we would be able to go play in the NIT. I mean, sure, it's like postseason play, and it's like you kind of just get it for playing in the Big Ten and having not like the worst Big Ten record ever, but like I don't think we deserve to play in postseason play. I don't think we had a good enough year, but that's not really the reasons why I would argue against it. My biggest reasons why are guys are looking to move on. Like guys are looking to move out of the Maryland program. We had a horrible year, like I just said, and guys don't want to play more games. If every team opted into this, I'm sure plenty of guys would opt out of this kind of the NIT tournament, the not invited tournament, what everybody calls it, not invited to March Madness. But guys are ready to move on. We had 2 players already enter the portal in Caleb Swatton Rogers, Noah Batchelor. Like, they didn't want to play more games, and I wouldn't want them playing more games for Maryland. I want them to prepare for their next kind of moment in their next team and get ready to see what opportunities they have and have as many opportunities as they possibly can, and to be in the portal as early as possible, because those 2 guys, if you keep going along, teams get their guys, teams use their scholarships. And so once you play a bunch of games in the NIT, you're going to lose some opportunities in the portal. So I think it made a lot of sense for Maryland not to go. And then also, I think the best situation for the team right now is not to play. You have Kevin Willard here, who needs to figure out a lot about the team going into next year and needs to use the portal. I think Maryland fans want Kevin Willard focusing on the portal so we can potentially get back to the dance next year instead of focusing on game planning for an NIT game. We have plenty of guys leaving, and we have Jameer Young and Dante Scott out. We're going to need new players in the portal, so I think it makes sense that Kevin Willard is focusing on recruiting and not game planning for an NIT game that's like pointless, really, in my opinion. I'm not sure the fan base would really like support and watch the games. I don't even know if I would be excited about it, to be honest. It just feels like you're playing extra games kind of, I don't want to say for no reason, but it kind of can feel like that a little bit. And that's just my stance on it. I know it's basketball. It's still postseason play, so you can argue the other side, and that's perfectly fine. But that's my kind of way of thinking about it. That's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked On Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked On Terps.